Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of our German grammar series. In our last video, we looked at 3 of German's 4 cases, nominative, accusative, and dative, and how the definite articles der, das, and die decline for each. Today, we're going to add plural nouns to these declensions, as well as the final case, genitive, which we use for possession or when two nouns are closely related. We'll go into more detail on that, and we have a lot to cover, so in the meantime, los geht's! Let's start by adding plural nouns to our declension chart. You've probably seen plural nouns with d in front of them. This is the same as for feminine words. In fact, all of the plural declensions are the same as the feminine, except for dative, in which d becomes den instead of der. So, die Piratinnen verstecken die Truhen vor den Meerjungfrauen can be said in the singular as die Piratin versteckt die Truhe vor der Meerjungfrau. That being said, adding plurals to complete our chart of definite articles cases is pretty straightforward, and as long as you remember that they line up with the feminine case, except for dative, you'll be okay. Let's continue filling out our chart by looking at the genitive case. As a case goes, the genitive is pretty straightforward, but it can be confusing when you're used to English. It is used primarily to show possession, and has a couple of quirks to remember. Where we would say the goblin's gold, German would say das Gold des Kobolds. Note the word order change, the transformation of der to des, and the lack of an apostrophe in German. This change is tricky, and it helps to think of it instead as the gold of the goblin. Now, you'll probably recall in our video on cases that articles decline differently depending on what gender they are. In this case, for the word der Kobold, the masculine der became des. Genitive only has a couple changes to remember. Both the masculine and neuter articles behave the same, and so do the feminine and the plural. So der and das both become des, and the feminine and plural die change into der. An example of this is der Zauberspiegel der Hexe. Remember, the witch would otherwise be die Hexe. This may be especially confusing to learners because this is the same declension that die used in the dative case, so pay extra attention to the construction of noun, article, noun, in order to recognize that it is a word in the genitive case. It is helpful to think of translating the witch's magic mirror into the magic mirror of the witch. That is not quite all either. The extra s at the end of kobold only shows up on masculine and neuter words. You would never see der Hexes. I remember this with the silly phrase, add an s to the word after des, but if you see der, just leave the word there. Finally, for ease of pronunciation, if the word is either one syllable or ends in an s or z sound, add es, giving the word an additional syllable. For example, die Klinge des Schwertes. You also use genitive case pretty much whenever English could use the words of the to relate to nouns. This is easiest demonstrated through example. The door of the castle becomes die Tür des Schlosses, and the handle of the door becomes die Klinke der Tür. It isn't too difficult conceptually, but your inclination will likely be to use a preposition like you would with the English of the. So it'll take some practice and intentional speaking to sound like a German. I should mention though, that it is actually possible to build this construction with a preposition instead. You can use von plus the dative case instead of the genitive case, though it is less common and you'll probably sound like you're trying to avoid using the genitive. The above sentences could be das Gold vom Kobold, der Zauberspiegel von der Hexe, die Tür vom Schloss, or even das Pferd von Held Heinrich, which would be the most common since it is being used with a name. You can use these, but it's a mouthful, and if you want to sound German, you should practice using the genitive case. I need to point out now that the genitive case construction does not apply to names. Proper nouns and their possessions work similarly to English, but without the apostrophe. Instead of saying das Pferd des Heinrichs, which would be wrong, you should say Heinrichs Pferd, just like you would say Heinrichs horse. The word order is the same as English, and the noun gets an s if it doesn't already have one. If the name ends in an s, then when writing it, you add an apostrophe to the end, so it may look like Heinrichs Pferd spricht gut von Hans Tote. Let's practice using the genitive case by building a ridiculous sentence. Heinrich's horse carries the goblin's gold, the princess's jewelry, and the children's toys through the door of the castle. We start with Heinrichs Pferd trägt, similar to the English construction, and now we have to do some word flipping. Remember to think of it as the gold of the goblin, so we add das Gold des Kobolds, the jewelry of the princess, den Schmuck der Prinzessin, and the toys of the children, die Spielzeuge der Kinder. Finally, we're going through the door of the castle, and so we add durch die Tür des Schlosses. Notice that all of these carried objects are in the accusative case because the verb tragen is acting on all of them. We end up with Heinrichs Pferd trägt das Gold des Kobolds, den Schmuck der Prinzessin und die Spielzeuge der Kinder durch die Tür des Schlosses. We covered a lot today in learning how to decline articles for plural words and how to use the genitive case. It was a very quick overview, and this does require practice, so don't lose hope if you're having trouble remembering how to build the genitive case. But keep practicing and working it into your German conversations. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if so, please hit like and subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions or thoughts. In the meantime, bis zum nächsten Video!